Hello everyone, my name is Denis Salnikov and I'm happy to welcome you at the AgileByExample 2020 conference. This year we are going live online, as you know, and I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. The topic I'm going to share with you today is called switching from Scrum to Kanban. Forget it. It sounds pretty provocative, but I hope that by the end of my talk you will understand the message I would like to deliver. At first, let me introduce myself. I'm currently working as a lead agile coach at OTP Bank Russia. I also do some private practice and consultancy as an independent agile coach at a company called AgileByExample. And since August 2020, I'm based in Moscow, Russia. I spent previous 4 years working and living in Europe, mostly in Cyprus and Germany, but in total I've been able to work with different development teams, management and product people in 8 countries. I'm an active Scrum, LESS and Kanban practitioner, and if you have any questions or if you would like to get in touch, you can use this contact data. The talk I'm going to share today is based on actual experience at various companies. You can see some of them here. Those are companies of various size, from small startups to big enterprises. Those are companies of different industries, from logistics and forex to banking and loan comparison. And what I would like to tell you is that practices I will share with you today and advices I will share with you today are all proven in real circumstances. So, Scrum versus Kanban. I bet many of you have seen articles comparing Scrum framework and Kanban method, YouTube videos trying to highlight the key similarities and differences between these two tools. And I've been asked this question also many times. So how are they different, what's similar, and especially which one works better for us in our circumstances? That question usually comes up either at the job interview or it comes up during the first days with the team. And the, I think, second most popular question people ask is, so we've tried Scrum, we feel it doesn't work for us, let's switch to Kanban. Usually team members or product owner come with this question, and I would like to share why I think it doesn't make sense. So first of all, it doesn't make sense to talk about switching to Kanban because there are certain principles behind the Kanban method. And the Kanban change management principle number 1 states that you need to start with what you do now, meaning that you try to understand the current processes as they are practiced, you try to respect existing roles, responsibilities and job titles. In the Scrum context, it would mean that you don't drop doing sprints, that you don't stop doing your sprint plannings, retrospectives, etc., that you don't ditch the product owner, Scrum Master title, and that your team still has all responsibilities it had before. But at the same time, you try to visualize it, you try to make it more transparent, and try to understand what can be improved. And there are certain ways to benefit from Kanban. I will share 4 practices today, and the first one, which can help you to benefit before the sprint, is called Upstream Kanban. All Scrum practitioners know that product backlog is one of the key elements, the key artifact of the Scrum framework, and as we know, it is a composition of all plans and ideas we have regarding our product, like the new features, the technical improvements, technical debt, bugs, some spikes to do some investigation, etc. And usually it looks like that. So in the bottom of the backlog, you have the least valuable items, or at least the items that are perceived as the least valuable. They're very granular, high level, and not detailed enough. Closer to the top of the backlog, you have items which are probably will go into the few next sprints. Those that are at the very top and seem the most valuable by the product owner are usually the most detailed ones and the most granular ones. If your team uses definition of ready, they already fulfill it, probably. You also have items somewhere in the middle, which are not that vague as the bottom ones, but at the same time not as detailed as the top ones yet. And what happens usually is that to get into the state of ready, or to get in the state of being prepared enough and discussed enough, your items go through a certain number of steps, like discussions, like consulting with the domain experts, like doing customer development interviews, and etc. So what Upstream Kanban, also called Discovery Kanban, is the kind of funnel which helps you to, which visualizes the process of you clarifying the ideas, clarifying the opportunities which come up, and deciding which of them should be really delivered in the end. When it comes to using your product backlog as an upstream Kanban, you can just basically put it on the side. So if your product backlog looks like the horizontal, like the vertical line, where you have like the least valuable items in the bottom and the most valuable items at the top, in upstream Kanban it would mean that you go from left to right. And in the screenshot you currently see on your screens is an upstream Kanban, or like a product backlog represented as an upstream Kanban we've used with one of my clients. So the area on the far right, which is surrounded with red lines, is the actual product backlog. It's already broken down into two sides. So it's the left side is items which are still to be refined, and the items on the right are those that have already been refined and ready to be taken in the upcoming sprints. But also before that you have certain steps like customer development, like triage session, like detailing, which are supposed to allow you to highlight the need for collaboration, that you involve the people from development team into that collaboration with the customer, with domain knowledge experts, and also they are just supposed to make it more transparent how many items you have coming up. So main benefits of representing your product backlog as an upstream Kanban is uncovering possibilities for further collaboration and bridging your development team members with the customers or stakeholders. Then come practices from Kanban that can be useful within the sprint. The first one is called work in progress or work in process limits. Probably you are familiar with it already. So let me get back to the Kanban principles. Besides Kanban change management principles, there are also Kanban service delivery principles. And Kanban service delivery principle number 2 states, manage the work, let people self-organize around it. We all know that in the most companies, especially like those that are still following the Taylorism paradigm, the industrial paradigm, managers usually prefer to manage people and to aim for 100% utilization of their time. A work in progress limits is a practice which allows you to basically switch from having a push-based development or push-based process to pull-based process, meaning that you don't push items further in your board, on your Kanban board as soon as something gets done, like for example the code has been written and the PR created, but that you pull them when there is enough capacity or enough free space in that a certain step. For example, if you have a work in progress limit of 3 for a code review state and there are already 3 pull requests that are waiting to be reviewed, you cannot put anything there, and the person who wants to create a pull request should probably first check someone else's pull request and get it approved or either reverted. I would like to share with you the results of using work in progress limits using the control chart, which you might know. It's one of the standard charts they have in Jira, and it's also a very useful chart when it comes to working with the Kanban or Scrum teams. So I just wanted to highlight a few things which you could have already observed, like the spikes we have here in terms of the blue background. So me as a Scrum Master joined this team in the late February and started actively participating in their work only in early March. Also in mid-April, late May, early May, there was a season of vacations, which people still took despite the COVID. And there was also some turbulence due to change in the team's composition, which came as a company's response to some actions they had to take as a response to COVID. So how to read this chart? You can see here the horizontal red line, the horizontal or almost horizontal blue line, and a huge amount of dots. So dots which are white in the middle and surrounded with the green line are single product backlog issues, so single items which have been finished in a certain amount of days. The huge green dots are the clusters of items which have been finished in approximately the same amount of days. The horizontal red line is a sprint length nowadays, or like it can be also seen as a commitment point, or like as an SLA in Kanban teams. So our aspiration on how long we usually have to do something until it will be done. And that blue line is an average time in progress per item, which we have in our system. So as you can see in the beginning, by beginning I mean March and April, there were plenty of items which were finished outside of the 2-week time box, the 2-week time sprint we had. And what it means from the system perspective, it means that we are not really reliable with our forecast. That when we take something into the sprint, that when we commit to some sprint goal, that when we forecast our sprint backlog, we are not really reliable in terms of being really able to deliver that. And we all know that this is not the best situation to be in, because when you are not reliable in a long-term perspective, it affects the trust, it affects your belief in yourself, and it's something you better address. Little's law is a law which states that the more items you have in the line, in the queue, the more time it will take for all of them to be finished. And Little's law is pretty crucial when trying to describe why work in progress limits are useful. You can see this picture where we see that the minutes until I get coffee are directly depends on the number of people in queue, in line, and the amount of time each person spends while waiting for their coffee to be done. So nobody wants to be the last person in the queue, and the same kind of relates to the product backlog items. With this team, we did 2 attempts to introduce work in progress limits. The first one was mostly me trying to persuade team to do this, and as you see, it was not really stable and it didn't last long enough, because as we all know, when we are trying to introduce something without really creating enough clarity around the value of something, you usually face resistance. And also with the COVID outbreak starting, the period of being sent to work from home, like people were really focused on different things, which we can also understand and appreciate. We had to take care of our relatives, we had to take care of our children, we had to take care of our apartment to make it comfortable for continuous working and living from home. So there was a shift of focus. But what also happened later, in the middle of May, after the team composition has changed and we were unfortunately left out of our tech lead, who has been working with the team for a few years, and the product owner has changed, team asked to introduce work in progress limits themselves. Because when we took a look at this graph and we analyzed the previous performance of the team, they've seen that this practice gives good results. As you can see, every time we were introducing work in progress limits and they were really respected by the team, the horizontal blue line, which represents the average time in progress, went down. What's more important, that when we tried to do this for the second time, and it was and that was asked for by the team, in the very first sprint we had 0 items which we were not able to finish in 2 weeks. And I can say that in the future, even though I don't have this graph, the team continued to use work in progress limits, and that it also allowed the team to really fulfill the goals they had for the third quarter of 2020, even despite all circumstances and despite all turbulence which the 2020 brought to us. Another positive benefit of managing the work, limiting the work, and letting people self-organize around it is that you will see different collaboration flourishing in your team. Like people can start doing pair programming or mob programming, which positively affects the efficiency of your delivery and the quality of your delivery. People can start having fruitful discussions earlier. That also positively affects the quality and reduces the amount of free work generated in the process. Or people can just finally focus on the work they do, which also positively benefits the time, the quality, and how people enjoy doing their work. Besides that, Applying work in progress limits also positively affects your flow efficiency. By flow efficiency, I mean the ratio of time each product backlog item spends being really addressed and waiting in queue for being addressed. Like, for example, if you see that your product backlog item spends 3 days in code review, probably it doesn't take 3 days to review that pull request. Probably it's been waiting in queue for like 2.5 days, and then it just spent 30 minutes being addressed. And if you count flow efficiency in most of the teams you enter or work with, you will surprisingly uncover that the average flow efficiency is about like 12 or 15%, and that's something that can be really improved, because like having a lot of wait time on the work that has been already started is a waste from lean perspective, and it's something that we need to aim to address. And by the way, those two principles, like limiting the work in progress and pull-based approach, are already naturally ingrained into the Scrum framework, because, as you remember, the development team is the role which decides and pulls the work they can finish in the sprint, not the product owner pushing the work there. And also, after the sprint has been started, without the mutual agreement, nothing can be added on top. Another practice I would like to shortly share is called cycle time and lead time. These are not practices, these are metrics, but they're very useful ones. If I would have to quickly describe what it is, so cycle time is the amount of time we need to finish the item since it has been started, and the lead time is the amount of time we need to finish it since it has been created in our product backlog, so since the very first time that idea came up. And it's very important to count them, because they also affect your predictability. You can easily see them at the cumulative flow diagram. Of course, it's only a very high level overview, but still that can give you some insights, and you can see if something is going good or bad, and if there are positive or negative trends. It's even more important when you work with the Scrum team, which produces the increment which is not really done from the overall system perspective. For example, if after you produce your done increment, it still needs to undergo the regression testing, or the release needs to be prepared, or some marketing materials need to be prepared, or some other team needs to do some work on top of it. So if your product development company really aims on to decrease the time to market, lead time should be your key metric. And if you understand that you're improving the cycle time of your team, but lead time does not decrease or does not change significantly, then probably you are doing too much local optimization, and you need to start optimizing the system as a whole. Also, another good thing about both cycle time, lead time, and work in progress limits is that you can start having more data as an input to your retrospectives. We all know that the sprint retrospective is a meeting where we come together to discuss how the last sprint went in terms of processes, in terms of collaboration, in terms of tools. And data can be a very good indicator that something is going good or bad here, or something is improving or getting worse. And the last practice I would like to share can be useful beyond the sprint, and it's called probabilistic forecasting. Let me introduce Don Wells, one of the early adopters of extreme programming, and when he was working at Chrysler in 2001, he shared his observations at one of the extreme programmers forums, that he and his team started to count the items that has been done in the iteration, and they understood that indefinitely from the estimated effort, in the end they managed to finish about 8 things each week without any estimation. So it means that whatever story points they had, every week they managed to finish 8 things. And I've observed that trend many times. So here you can see the chart of one team which was doing story points estimation and of course counting velocity. And as we can see, their velocity was not really stable, so it was jumping up and down. These were only the first 10 sprints of the team, and it may seem that the team is not reliable with their forecast. But when we took a look at the velocity chart, at the throughput chart, we saw that when it comes to counting the number of tickets done, the team is performing pretty stable and it's pretty reliable. So we started taking the throughput into account when doing our sprint planning, and we understood in the future that it gives us a chance to be more reliable and that velocity can really depend on different factors while throughput stays pretty stable. The same thing occurred with another team I've consulted this spring. So the team was also absolutely new to Scrum, never worked with Scrum and cross-functional teams before. And of course, that led to some period of turbulence. These are not the very first sprints of the team because unfortunately we were not tracking that since the very beginning. The very first sprint here on that graph is the sixth sprint of the team and so on. And as we see, even though velocity is not jumping up and down as crazy as it was in the previous team, still the throughput is much more reliable for measurement here than the velocity. What it gives us is a possibility to do probabilistic forecasting because I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, even when you switch to Scrum, even when people state that they want to become more agile as a company or as an organization, they still fall into an old trap of doing some forecasting and upfront planning, which is not bad, but it brings some problems to our tables as Scrum Master or Agile coaches. And if somebody comes and asks you when something can be done, if you're doing story points estimation, that would mean that you would need to spend time and effort to estimate all your product backlog. And from the lean perspective, again, it would be a waste. It would be also a waste from the Agile Manifesto perspective because we aim for simplicity, meaning maximizing the amount of work not done. And you can use throughput to do probabilistic forecasting without applying any additional effort. So you can just count the average time of count the average amount of items you finish within the sprint. You can then just take a product backlog, divide it by that number, also apply some optimistic and pessimistic buffers and see when something can be possibly finished if there will be no scope creep or like change of priorities. We still need to understand that this is not a 100% guaranteed result, but at least it gives the answer to the question so many people and companies want to have. These were 4 practices from Kanban, which can be useful for Scrum teams I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions if there are some.
Thank you very much, Denis. This was a very interesting topic and a very interesting presentation for me as well. Like I said, I'm really curious about some productivity differences or like other pros and cons of using Scrum versus Kanban with your teams. So I'm sure that that people in our chat are also really curious about this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the chat right now. And we do have the first question coming in. So the question is probably more towards Scrum Kanban in consultation settings, but would be interesting for intra-company projects as well. How do you make sure that, and I'm sorry, this question was too long, so I need to read this here. How do you make sure that the practices are used once you wrap the project up? So sorry, I will read this again. How do you make sure that the practices are used once you wrap the project up?
Yeah, thank you, Pavel. Well, it's an interesting question. I must say that I was always, before I started doing consulting myself and before I faced some circumstances, I was pretty skeptical about consultancy for the same reason. And what I end up with is that usually, like, I myself, at least as a consultant, I try to not focus too much on specific practices, but I try to focus more on the value that those practices bring and the ideas behind those practices. So as you have also probably seen during the presentation I've shared, like once I try to introduce the work in progress limits in the team myself without making people really understand and value it, that did not lead to any really significant results. But once the situation have changed and people started to understand the value, started to understand how it affects their work, they started using it themselves. So why I like Kanban in general, but the same relates to Scrum as well, is that it has a built-in feedback loops and built-in cycles of retrospection when you take a look at the previous period of time and you assess your performance and you try to understand whether it improved, still stayed the same, or decreased. And usually when people see that some of the practices you've offered to them really improved and they understand how this improvement can be measured and what this improvement leads to, it becomes much more easier to make sure that those practices will stay with the team or with the company as soon as you leave.
Thank you very much, Denis. And the next question from the public is, how do you define team throughput?
I mean, that's pretty easy. Team throughput can be defined only in retrospective analysis, meaning that you take historical data you have for the team and you just analyze it. So as it was, for example, in those two cases I've shared in the presentation, we did not try to guess our throughput upfront. We went through a series of sprints where we were using story points as an estimation technique. And after a set of sprints, we just took a look at this historical data, and we've observed that throughput was much more stable metric than the velocity, and decided to pay attention to it. It does not mean that after just having 3 or 4 sprints of stable throughput, we completely ditched doing story points. I see a lot of value in story points estimation when it comes to having fruitful discussions between people, making sure that we have common understanding of the expected outcomes and about the problem we are trying to solve. But we just started taking throughput into account and also doing sprint planning. And with one of the teams, with one of the teams, we came to a point when the team managed to have those fruitful discussions without doing polka planning and story points estimation, and we just teach doing story points and focused completely on throughput. So it's more like, it's like in spiral dynamics. So you introduce first some rules which people share, and after some time, when people understand why you have those rules and how they help them, they just take ownership of those rules and you can start adapting them, just like in Shuhari concept.
Perfect. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much for this answer, Denis. So guys, the time of this talk and the first part of our AgileByExample conference 2020 is coming to an end now. We are going to start lunch after this presentation, and the lunch break will finish at just double check that for you, at 12:50. So we're back at 12:50 here for another talk. If you're not hungry, there is some more attractions that we can serve in this lunch break. So there is join Ask the Expert. You can join Ask the Expert and Coaching Corners. There is a talk at the Demand booth starting right now. There's also a talk at the PKOBP booth starting at 1:30, which I want to let you know about this kind of ahead of time right now. At the end of this talk, I also want to say that you can continue the discussion about Scrum and Kanban with Denis on a dedicated Slack channel, talk Salnikov, switching from Scrum to Kanban. Together, again, click on the plus next to the channels and then just look for the channel on the list. You can browse it from the list. And also feel free to give feedback to Denis after this presentation using the link that I will just paste in the chat in a minute. Thank you very much.